barren planet becomes Earth as we know it. It all began around 4 billion years ago. Life spawns. Gradually it spreads to every corner of the planet. Throughout millions upon millions of years, evolution has brought forth an immeasurable multitude of animals and plants. Yet, as different as they may look, all species are related. The first to discover this was an Englishman named Charles Darwin.
Darwin completely changed the way we see ourselves, the way we see the whole of life.
What is intelligence? Why do we have to sleep? And what's the difference between man and animal? The wall that divides us is becoming more and more permeable. Time and again, disaster wreaks havoc with life upon Earth. But until now, it has always survived. Scientists probe the big questions of life. They come across astounding facts and acquire revealing insights about the great moments in evolution. In the beginning, planet Earth is utterly hostile to life. It's a hot, seething mass, not only inside, but also on the surface. As yet, no water exists. Only when temperatures have cooled sufficiently do the first rainfalls set in, meaning torrential downpours for millennia. Finally, Earth is covered by one gigantic primeval ocean. Just a few volcanic islands protrude above its waters. On the surface, our planet has evolved immensely. Deep inside, however, things look more or less just as they have done for billions of years. So-called black smokers are a vent for the core of the planet. Through them, minerals and boiling water are seething to the surface. Most of them are far too hot for life to develop. Yet there are also white smokers, funnels which are merely pleasantly warm. A condition favorable for bringing the most important molecules of life into contact. Amino acid, sugar, bases, and fats. They collide, compound, and decay. In an endless dance, swirling for millions of years, they regularly produce RNA, ribonucleic acid, which is closely related to our own genetic material. In the process, the molecule chains store information. The sequence of colored bases can be read like a revealing text. But this is still just chemistry, not life. But the chain has another fascinating capacity. It's able to replicate. So the formula, as a basis for life, is retained and can multiply. But this pre-life state still lacks one decisive feature: protection against its surroundings. In time, there is a solution for this problem too. An envelope of fat clings around the first cell. It's called LUCA, the last universal common ancestor, the common forebear of all living beings that ever existed. It began with a single cell in the ocean. Throughout the course of more than 3 billion years, it has produced the breathtaking diversity that surrounds us. No one knows how many species exist today, let alone how many more have become extinct. So far, scientists have discovered and classified about 1.8 million species. It may well be that there are 100 million. True, evolution had a slow start, but it continuously built up its momentum. If we were to compress the history of Earth into a single year, LUCA would appear in early February. Until summer, there would be nothing more than single-cell organisms populating the ocean. Life only explodes on November 20th in what we call the Cambrian era. The lineage of man and chimpanzee splits on December 29th. Homo sapiens makes his entry on December 31st, a half hour before midnight. We are the new arrivals, yet we have changed the planet more than any other being before us. So, what has happened in the last few minutes of our own evolution? There's probably no one better qualified to answer that question than Jane Goodall. In her pioneering work, the famous behavioral researcher has made groundbreaking discoveries. From early childhood, her life has centered around animals.
All I wanted to do was live with animals and write books about them. That was it. I had no intention of being a scientist, a naturalist, yes. You know, this was after I read Tarzan of the Apes and Dr. Dolittle and things. So, of course, I couldn't have the remotest idea of what this study would lead to.
Jane was 23 when her long-cherished dream came true. She got the opportunity to study chimpanzees in the wilds of their native Tanzania. But to begin with, Jane found only traces of their presence. Their sleeping nests, for instance. Every day she would set off into the jungle, but the chimpanzees fled as soon as they became aware of her presence. Weeks turned into months, full of hardship and frustration. Jane meticulously attuned the rhythm of her activities to the habits of the animals. She even spent her nights in their proximity to get them accustomed to the sight of this strange biped.
When you start something, if it's an important something, you just don't give up.
Her dedication paid off. By and by, the chimpanzees became familiar with their human shadow. Now, Jane's work could begin in earnest.
You know, the exciting moment was when a group of chimpanzees that I expected to run away because I got too close to them by mistake, and they looked up and went on grooming, and that was really magic. You know, they trusted me, they accepted me.
She learned that chimpanzees are much closer to humans than had been assumed.
You can trace little pieces of us right back to the beginning of evolution. The components of our bodies, for example. So there are no sharp lines. It's all a question of degree and gradual change. And that's what was so shocking to the scientific community. It was felt that we were unique.
In fact, mankind had merely taken one more evolutionary step. This revelation became obvious to Jane when she observed that chimpanzees were making use of tools, a skill which until then had been assumed to be exclusive to humans. About 7 million years ago, early man and chimpanzee parted ways. On the time scale of evolution, we're merely the blink of an eye apart.
We were actually defined, this is 1960, man the toolmaker. And so when I first reported that David Greybeard, the first chimpanzee I saw using a tool, the first chimpanzee to trust me, not only breaking off stems and using them to fish termites from their underground passage, but picking a leafy twig and stripping the leaves, which is modifying that object, making a tool. And so Louis Leakey said, well, now we shall have to redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans.
The first to articulate the revolutionary notion that man and chimpanzee are related was Charles Darwin. In 1832, the young natural scientist is cruising off the tip of South America. Ashore, he encounters innumerable species of unfamiliar animals and plants, all of them designed by the heavenly creator, according to popular belief at the time, within merely 1 week. While collecting their samples, Darwin grows ever more doubtful. There are new discoveries everywhere. Among them, huge bones from species that had obviously been long extinct. Rounding Cape Horn, Darwin reaches the Galapagos Islands. His observations there were to become the foundation of his theory of evolution. He notices that the Galapagos finches vary from island to island. Some had different beaks, others were different in color. So what might have caused these variations? An outrageous idea gathers shape in Darwin's mind. Could it be that some species did originate right here on these islands, and by adapting to their surroundings, had incrementally evolved into ever new species? And that the miracle of nature as a whole had not been shaped from nothing by an almighty creator, but had developed in a succession of evolutionary stages. Darwin thinks so, but he keeps his thoughts to himself, confiding them only to his diary. For a long time he dares not publish his ground-shaking concept, that all species stem from a single common primeval ancestor, plants, animals, and man. In 1859, the first edition of The Origin of Species causes a sensation, and as Darwin had anticipated, he instantly comes under attack. His book challenges every concept his contemporaries believed in. The idea of evolution strikes at the very heart of Christian doctrine.
This book, The Origin of Species, told humanity that purely natural forces, the laws of physics working through this very peculiar process of natural selection, can produce all the beauty and the elegance and the apparent design of living creatures. Before that, people thought it had to be done by a designer. They couldn't think of any other way to do it. It seemed almost obvious to them. So Darwin shattered that illusion. Darwin completely changed the way we see ourselves, the way we see the whole of life.
The theory of evolution explains how a new species originates. In the African savanna, for all its diversity of life, the overall picture is relatively dull. Most of its animals roam about in earth-colored hides or coats barely distinct from the dry soil. Not so the zebras. They stand out from afar. But what is the purpose of their distinctive black and white stripes? It was long assumed that this pattern served to perplex predators. But for a lion, a distant zebra looks simply grey. The potential attacker to be evaded is very much smaller and strikes from the air. The tsetse fly is a carrier of deadly diseases like the sleeping sickness. But the fly's multifaceted eyes are incapable of processing the stripe pattern into a coherent image. They simply fail to see their victims. In the tsetse belt of Africa, these pests have been out for prey since time immemorial. Yet here they encountered horses that had put on a protective camouflage, the zebras. Their relatives outside the belt went unmolested, allowing them to remain mono-colored. On the fringes of the belt once lived the quagga. Its front half sported stripes, the hind part was mono-colored. So, how did evolution achieve putting stripes on a formerly mono-colored animal? Yet even the common ancestors of horse and zebra wore a discrete pattern. With each coupling, the genes were mixed anew. Some of their offspring had more stripes, some had fewer. Over time, a less distinctive pattern proved a definite disadvantage. The flies would pounce on their identifiable victims and infect them with contagious diseases. The multi-striped forebears of the zebra proper escaped infection and proliferated, a classic example of natural selection. Eventually, all horses in the tsetse belt wore stripes. A new species had evolved, the zebra. The flies had to search for other victims. As evolution ran its course, living beings all over the planet adapted to the challenges of their surroundings. Life has come a long way since the first cell drifted in the oceans almost 4 billion years ago. Some habitats seem ideally suited to spawn a whole string of fantastic creatures. Coral reefs are among the most species-rich realms of life on our planet. Reef diving is akin to a stroll through a vibrant city. New sights abound, although sometimes you need to take a second look. Each coral is a tiny marvel in itself. They are home to microscopic algae which produce oxygen. Scientists assume that the number of species in and surrounding a tropical reef can be as high as 1 million. while other places are almost barren. Deserts are especially hostile to life. Yet extreme conditions merely seem a challenge to evolution to produce new solutions. A ball of manure is guaranteeing the future for the next generation of dung beetles. This is where their larvae develop and grow. Evolution isn't merely a matter of physical adaptation, it's also about modifying and adapting behavior. This beetle doesn't yet seem to have answers to all likelihoods, but give or take a few million years, his descendants may even have learned a way to deal with trickling sand. There seems to be almost nothing nature has not thought of. Take the mimic octopus. It's able to switch its appearance in an instant to resemble a highly poisonous sea dweller, be they sea snake or lionfish. The mimic's superb vision enables it to imitate their appearance to perfection. The vision of one of its distant relatives, however, is literally dim. The nautilus is hopelessly short-sighted. But when this species was young, its eyes were state-of-the-art, and since then it obviously hasn't felt the need to change them.
Essentially, the entire world around you changes as soon as you can see your world. You have much more input from your environment. You can see predators from the far distance. You can see prey from a further distance. You have much more information, much more to process, so it may have controlled the evolution of brains. It may also have accelerated the evolution in general.
Nearly all living creatures are subject to it. Whether it be a frog or mankind, we all view the world around us. We see and are being seen. The evolution of sight is truly one of nature's greatest achievements, and throughout millions upon millions of years, each species developed the eyes it needed to survive. Chameleons, for instance, have a near-perfect all-round vision. They can move each eye independently, and once they have locked onto their prey, there's no escaping. The eye of an eagle. It's one of the sharpest organs of sight ever. An eagle's vision is 3 to 4 times superior to that of man. How could evolution develop something as infinitely complex? A question that puzzled even Charles Darwin.
The eye, Darwin mentioned the eye as a problem, but only to knock it down. I mean, that was a rhetorical device, because you can imagine and indeed find throughout the animal kingdom a whole series of eyes representing intermediate stages from almost no eye at all, just a light-sensitive spot or light-sensitive patch, right through to a complicated eye like the human eye or an octopus eye.
The origins of the eye go back to the earliest days of evolution. Even single-cell organisms like the euglena have a spot which functions as a sensor and shows them the direction of light. Or take the flat eye of the jellyfish. It enables them to discern between bright and dark. Next step, the pit eye. This is how most mussels and snakes view the world. The smaller the iris, the greater the depth of focus. The edible snail is already provided with a tiny lens to gather the light. It doesn't take much more, and you have the highly efficient organ with which we and all other vertebrates view our surroundings. The lens eye is an ingenious invention of evolution.
We now believe that there was one prototype eye early on, and we assume that because there's one gene responsible for the development of eyes, and that gene is very crucial to getting it right. And that gene is found across essentially all animals that do have eyes.
Even trilobites must have had it. They were among the first to see actual images. More than 500 million years ago, they used their sharp eyes to hunt. A worm like this, which could only discern shadows, hadn't a chance. But luckily for him, there were other, more dangerous predators prowling the primeval ocean. Anomalocaris grew to more than a meter in length. Its excellent vision soon put it at the top of the food chain. Its eyes were as complex as those of insects. Each one consisted of almost 20,000 eye cells. There are but few other inventions of evolution which played such a decisive role in determining which species would survive and which were doomed to extinction. One solution is to seek shelter from the hungry eyes of the predators by hiding in the dark, but evolution pushed on relentlessly. Eventually, the eyes of nocturnal hunters grew bigger. And if that were not enough, nature provided them with an inbuilt reflector designed to catch low light to enhance their night vision. That's why their eyes glow in the glare of a spotlight. It has long been assumed that it was the event of mammals that spelt the end for nocturnal peace. Dinosaurs, experts generally agreed, spread fear and terror only in daylight. The giants of their age spent their nights soundly asleep. But does this commonly held view, published in numerous books and articles, stand the test of recent discoveries? Trossingen, in the Swabian Alps, is one of the most important sites for studies on the dawn of dinosaurs. More than a century ago, the first skeletal finds were reported, and to this day, the area in southern Germany is a treasure trove for dinosaur researchers. Nowhere else have so many bones of Plateosaurus been found. The appearance of this plant eater has been largely ascertained, but its way of life isn't that easy to reconstruct. And as research has shown, it's always good for a surprise. About 200 million years ago, long before the first T-Rex raised its head, the region of what later became the Swabian Alps was home to large groups of Plateosauruses. To cover their enormous demand for calories, they had to feed almost continuously. Like elephants today, they could indulge in only a short night's sleep. Must have been a strenuous life. But how can we know all that? Like forensic detectives, researchers extract more and more information from the fossilized bones. At the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, Lars Schmitz was measuring the eye sockets of birds and reptiles. This enabled him to extrapolate the size of the eyeball and the eye's sensitivity to light. Birds who are active in blazing sunlight, like parrots, have smaller eyes in relation to their skull than nocturnally active birds. He then turned to extinct species like the pterodactyls or dinosaurs, and with a good few of the latter, he found the typical traits of nocturnally active eyes.
The results were a complete surprise to us. We didn't expect to find that many nocturnal dinosaurs. And I doubted my results for months and checked them repeatedly and remeasured many specimens, reran the analyses, and overall it seems to be a robust analysis. We can never tell for sure for extinct animals. There's always uncertainty, but it seems likely that many of these dinosaurs were active at night.
Among those best equipped for hunting were troodons. The size of their eyes was huge, and what's more, their brain, in relation to body size, was the largest of all saurians. And they may have even used it for tactical scheming. Scientists assume that troodons were clever enough to encircle their victims and segregate a helpless young animal. Even long before the age of dinosaurs, eyesight had been a decisive factor in shaping the world. The Cambrian era, more than 500 million years before our time, was one of the decisive periods in evolution. Fossils tell of rather unpleasant conditions. Hunters and their prey had entered a veritable arms race. Life was exploding. Evolution was turning out new species at an ever-increasing pace. Opabinia, provided with no fewer than 5 eyes for all-round vision. Others donned armor, like the trilobites with their exoskeletons. There were poisonous spikes and bristles. still small but highly effective. Hallucigenia's teeth were as pointy as needles. It may have looked weird, but it's a direct forerunner of worms and insects. The Cambrian era laid the groundwork for the fauna as we know it, and ever since, the race between predator and prey has remained a crucial element of evolution. It's an impressive spectacle of confrontation and cooperation, such as here in the ocean. These sardines are hopelessly trapped. This giant needs merely to open his huge jaws. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Both sides have honed their strategies of survival. For those at the wrong end of the food chain, it's clearly a massacre. But since their species still exists, they must be doing something right. For the hunter, this goes without saying. Yet, it's not always a mere fight for a full belly. Among some species, claiming a habitat and its resources can lead to outright warfare. They already inhabit a paradise. The fig trees in their territory are the best far and wide. And they are all set to make it theirs. This neighboring group of chimpanzees has decided to go to war. The fig eaters go about their daily routines, utterly unaware of the impending danger. A patrol is sent forth to scout the terrain. Infiltrating a hostile territory calls for a devious approach. Then, it's all for the charge. Battle is joined. And there's nothing better to intimidate the opponents than to create a bewildering pandemonium. It's all intended to keep the attackers' casualties as low as possible. Some are lucky and manage to flee. Some don't. The attackers come out on top. One of their opponent's young has been killed and is devoured by the victors. A rare occasion when chimpanzees will eat meat. To us, it seems brutal and cruel.
When I first reported this warfare, I was disbelieved, and I was attacked, and I was actually told by respected scientists that I should play it down. Why? Because if Louis Leakey is right, and if this primitive warfare is a shared behavior of humans on the one hand and chimpanzees on the other, then that's probably been with us during our whole long evolutionary pathway, and therefore violence and war is inevitable.
So we, and they, are capable of applying violence. This much is obvious. Yet we are able to keep it under control. And, as it seems, there is actually another, softer side with primates. It's a side we can relate to much more easily. Freddie is an adult male. He has adopted little Oscar, an orphan, although he is in no way related to him. A motherless chimpanzee has no chance of survival. Sometimes his elder siblings will take care of him, but Oscar has no siblings. Freddie shares his food with him and teaches the little fellow everything he needs to know to survive. Researchers are at a loss to explain why Freddie does it. Perhaps he's intending to groom a future ally for eventual power struggles. Perhaps he merely wants to preserve his group. Or could this be just a case of actual selflessness? Evolution has brought forth violence and brutality, yet also compassion and the willingness to help others. Mammals need each one of these attributes to survive, and this applies most of all to us. and our nearest relatives. About 7 million years ago, man and chimpanzee each went their own ways. Today, their world is radically different from ours. Man has spread into the far corners of the planet. There are now 7 billion of us. So what has made our species so successful? In terms of physical power, we're only average. It's our ability to cooperate which has made us thrive. We succeed by combining our efforts, whereas singly we would fail. At the Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, researchers are working to ascertain what distinguishes us from anthropoid apes. They have set up a test for children. There is no way to get at the colourful marbles unless they cooperate. Their eagerness has been aroused. The marble monster demands to be fed. Nearby, at Leipzig Zoo, a group of chimpanzees are set a similar task, with bananas in place of marbles. The chimpanzees, too, need no prompting. It's a welcome change from the daily tedium in a zoo. Mission accomplished. Obviously, no verbal communication is required to succeed. But what if only one is reaping the rewards? 3 marbles for Carl? That's definitely unfair. None for Alma. But then, a sharing of the reward. And on they go. With the chimpanzees, Frodo seems the odd man out. No banana, no fun. Without any reward, he immediately loses interest. On his own, his chum promptly fails. In the end, they both go empty-handed. Contrary to children, cooperation among chimpanzees usually collapses if only one of their group is reaping the rewards. The difference in social behavior may seem tiny, but it might have been decisive. While his primate counterpart ignored the lesson, man built on experiences like this and opened new horizons for his species.
We have language, we have culture, we have technology, we have the ability to communicate with each other, skills like how to make machines, how to make motor cars, how to make computers. So we are hugely different from other species, and we're hugely different from the way we were 100,000 years ago, before we started to develop advanced technology and culture.
No other living being has developed a means of communication as elaborate as we have. Language allows us to express complex issues and thoughts. Unlike the bee, the parrot, or the elephant. Yet animals too have much to tell each other. They communicate in numerous ways. The humpback whale song, a concerto to lure the ladies. During the mating season, their suitors will sing up to 24 hours straight. Each song is composed of several verses repeated over and over again. Water is an excellent medium to carry sound waves, allowing them to travel unhindered over thousands of kilometers and enabling the great loners of the seas to locate each other in the immense expanse of the oceans. Yet whales are not the only chatterers underwater. Fish, too, are anything but mute. They grunt, shout, and quake. A coral reef has a soundscape similar to that of a metropolis. The louder the din, the healthier the reef. And for their communication, fish have a whole set of instruments at their disposal. When the gurnard contracts its swim bladder, it can deliberately produce a growl. Clownfish grind their jaws and teeth using the clicking and creaking sounds to defend their territory. Scientists have only begun to decipher the complex acoustic patterns fish use to communicate. The voices of birds, however, have been the subject of intensive research for decades. When mating, birds use visual as well as acoustic means. But as elaborate as this male's show may be, the message he wants to convey is simple. Mate with me. I'm the best choice to father your children. It's the same song the world over, and most of the time there is a receptive answer. With others, signalling has reached a more sophisticated level. Prairie dogs live in a system of subterranean corridors that can extend over several square kilometers. They have become the stars of communication research. Over the past 4 decades, scientists at the University of Arizona have been collating data to help them decipher the aural messages of this fascinating species. Beware, coyote. The animals react as if the dummy were the real thing. Test number 2, a badger, another common predator of the prairies. To our ears, both calls sound identical. Yet computer analysis shows that the sound waves for badger and coyote vary distinctly. The prairies are the hunting ground of all sorts of enemies, each one requiring adequate reaction. So, a diversified vocabulary can be most helpful. A woman wearing an orange t-shirt. The news is duly passed on. Same colour, different gender. This too can be conveyed. Now for a lady in blue, and again there is a specific sound for it. Newborn prairie dogs are not yet familiar with the meaning of these sounds. They must learn them in all their complexity, just as our children must learn to understand and to speak. The extent of communication among prairie dogs was a surprise to researchers. And as the study of communication among animals only begins to broaden, there are definitely many more astonishing observations awaiting them. An altogether different approach was chosen by American psychologist Winthrop Kellogg. In the 1930s, he hit upon the idea to raise a young female chimpanzee called Gua, along with his son, Donald. Would both of them, when raised in exactly the same environment, develop along the same lines? When it came to eating and drinking, there was no problem, and often the chimp came out on top. But would Gua begin to speak? Back then, language and intelligence were regarded as being closely interrelated. But Gua never spoke. Instead, young Donald began to utter the sounds of a chimpanzee. At that point, his parents called the experiment off. Today, we know that chimpanzees, due to their anatomy, are physically unable to speak. Even so, they're highly intelligent, but in their own separate ways. These days, researchers observe animals in their original habitats. It's only here that they will display their natural capacities. This chimpanzee lady, for instance, uses tools to reach the tasty honey and must also have learned that this is a stingless species of bees that won't harm her. Her offspring observes and learns, clear evidence of intelligence. Some birds even know how to make and use hooks and picks. The divide between mankind and animals seems ever more porous. Self-confidence and self-awareness were long regarded as being uniquely human. Yet, experiments show that primates are also able to recognize their image in a mirror, though sometimes this may take a while. But then, they will react the same way as we do, making faces and inspecting parts of their body they normally can't see. Only a few species will pass the mirror test. But are others less or even unintelligent? What's intelligence anyway? And how can we measure it? It's especially difficult when comparing various species.
Any species could lay claim to be unique in some ways. Swifts are extremely good at flying. Moles are extremely good at digging. And so, yes, all species, or many species, have their own uniqueness. And our uniqueness is one that we value especially highly. And it is a very important uniqueness. It has enabled us to pretty much take over the world.
But in evolution, nothing ever remains static. We don't know whether, in a distant future, some other being might replace us. Keas are among the most intelligent birds on Earth. They'll investigate anything. They are highly inquisitive, but their urge to explore doesn't always endear them to those on the receiving end. Near Vienna, researchers have set up an experiment to determine the true range of their slyness. Kermit loves a challenge. He takes the first hurdle in no time. The food is below, yet to reach it, he must climb upwards. That's better. Get rid of those bars. There are several obstacles in his way, and each time he must find a new detour to succeed. When encountering a problem such as this, most other species quickly give up. But Kermit is determined, and finally uses his beak as a substitute third hand. So, are there actually limits to what Keas can achieve?
There probably are, but we have not reached those limits yet. The biggest difficulty is designing experiments and tasks that test the more complex capabilities of their intelligence while still being self-explanatory so that they can understand what to do and how to solve them without any communication from us.
The harsh conditions of their New Zealand mountain home have taught the Keas that close social interaction is beneficial. They live in groups of varying formation, playfully learning ever new techniques of food gathering, as well as strategies for solving conflicts. Birds were long denied any intelligence. Today, we know that the proverbial bird brain is densely packed with nerve cells, so different lines of development may well lead to similar results. In terms of sheer mass, the sperm whale, its brain weighing almost 8 kilograms, ought to be the most intelligent being on Earth. Among terrestrials, the elephant's 5-kilo brain is unsurpassed. Yet comparisons only make sense among closely related species. Given that, it is humans who, relative to their body weight, have the largest brain. Step by step, researchers are retracing the genealogy of evolution. So far, many gaps have been filled, but an abundance of questions remain unanswered. One of the most enigmatic phenomena is sleep. There is no escaping it. Whether man or animal, at regular intervals we pass out. No matter how hard we try, there comes a point when we lose consciousness. Theories abound, but a definitive explanation for the meaning of sleep is still lacking. The fact is, no matter which path a species has taken in the course of evolution, sleep seems to have been indispensable, irrespective of the circumstances. Dolphins must surface to be able to breathe, even when they're asleep. That's why they shut down one half of their brain, while the other half maintains control. After an hour or so, this alternates, and the other half will take a nap. So, could duration of sleep give any indication as to its importance? Bats are dedicated sleepers, they easily manage 20 hours a day, more than most other mammals. Lions come a close second. When the hunt is over, it's time for a snooze, a royal rest that can last 18 hours. Gazelles, any lion's favorite prey, can ill afford to stay asleep for so long. After just 2 hours, they're up again. This minimizes the danger, and it allows them additional time to feed. Since plants provide lesser amounts of calories than meat, gazelles must eat more. So, as a rule, predators sleep longer than vegetarians. But at what stage did the compulsory need for sleep set in? Presumably, very early in the history of life. Even low-life worms need to sleep, as do snails and bees. Originally, sleep possibly just served as a means of recreation. In due course, evolution added ever more functions. Dreams, for instance. During sleep, we process what we have done and seen throughout the day, sifting and storing important information in order of relevance. Our memory expands, and we learn. While our body is at rest, our brain is highly active. This also applies to our immune system, which produces antibodies against all kinds of germs. Over millions of years, it has learned to combat a ceaseless invasion of intruders by continuously upgrading itself to challenge new bacteria and viruses. Some viruses, however, manage to outwit our cells. They latch onto them, infuse them with their own genotype, and thus take over the cells, inciting them to replicate millions of new viruses. But by now, our immune system has switched to panic mode. Its special forces rush in to identify and to destroy infected cells. This causes fever and weakens our body. Yet mostly, we survive. Ironically enough, our survival is also of the utmost importance to the viruses. Without their host, they too will die. All things that have a bearing on life are interrelated and underlie the principles of evolution. Here's the embodiment of an evolutionary interface. 375 million years ago, it was hunting in warm tropical waters. Tiktaalik was a lobe-finned fish destined to make history. Its species was the first to set foot on firm land. A small step for Tiktaalik, but one giant leap in the evolution of life. Tiktaalik may have merely been a fish walking on fins, but its bones are proof that its potential was far greater. It had shoulders, upper and lower arms, wrists and finger bones. This is the blueprint for all terrestrial vertebrates. Evolution is casting the same body plan in ever new molds. And so, by gradually expanding our dexterity, the human hand took shape. Evolution ensured that every species developed exactly the kind of arms and legs it would need to survive. And given the results, it seems hard to believe that there might have been any other option. Their diversity may seem astounding, but their common origins are literally rooted in their bones. In adults, these beginnings are hardly recognizable any longer, but the earliest stages tell a different story. All embryos are basically alike. Be it fish, turtle, or humans, we all run a similar course. The milk line of a human embryo soon begins to shrink. Several weeks later, the fingers and toes become webbed, but not for long. The webs will wane in the natural process of evolution. Not least, there'll be a coat of downy hair, the so-called lanugo hair, which also will disappear in time. The more developed an embryo becomes, the more evident the differences. By studying embryos and using comparative anatomy, Charles Darwin was able to show how evolution achieves the great transmutations, from fish to frog and finally to man.
It is very convincing, but DNA evidence, molecular evidence, is even more convincing. You can do the same kind of thing as Darwin did with skeletons. You can do that with DNA. And because DNA is text, enormously long strings of letters from a four-letter alphabet, you can compare them between any animal or plant and any other animal or plant. And you can get an exact measure of how different they are. And when you do that, you find that the pattern of resemblances falls into a perfect hierarchical tree.
And this pedigree shows that Tiktaalik was a progenitor of all terrestrial vertebrates. It is assumed that its going ashore wasn't all voluntary. Probably its options for survival in the shark pond of life were running out. On dry land, it was safe, for the time being. Tiktaalik entered a world of opportunities. The continents were still devoid of hungry competitors, yet evolution was quick to change this blissful state. It merely shifted up a notch, and the story of life as we know it began. Almost 150 million years would pass before dinosaurs made their entry onto the stage of life. Evolution brought forth the shoebill and the skunk, the elephant and the gorilla. There is only one thing evolution seems unable to do: come to a standstill. Flying is easily one of evolution's greatest inventions. Over millions of years, birds have perfected their skills as natural aviators. Yet, as simple and graceful as it appears, flying consumes enormous energy. Before they could fly great distances, birds needed to develop very specific anatomical and physiological features. 50 billion migratory birds are proof that they did so. By taking to the skies, they have spread across our planet. For birds, there are no borders. They negotiate ice deserts and vast oceans. Some species spend almost their entire lives in the air. Each of them has its own peculiar way of flying. Yet, the things they all have in common are wings and feathers. Flight feathers are a marvel of aerodynamics. Tiny hooks make them interlock and detach as required. This amounts to lightweight stability. Feathers and flying go together like the proverbial chicken and the egg. At least, this is what we had taken for granted. But then, in 1995, spectacular new fossil discoveries were made in China. Currently, no other site on Earth provides us with so many dinosaur fossils. And many of these species appear to have been feathered. Can these be classified as early precursors of birds? And what purpose did their plumage serve? Their physical traits clearly show that they didn't fly, because they couldn't. Around 160 million years ago, Epidexipteryx climbed through the primeval forests. With a length of just 45 centimeters, it was one of the smallest dinosaurs ever. What made it unique is an excessively long middle finger, an ideal tool for angling. Even back then, a juicy meal attracted competitors. Another feature that distinguishes Epidexy, its 4 long tail feathers. Are they the first indication of vanity? Could it be that the little saurians had a sense of aesthetics? We shall never know. Yet there were feathers long before any prehistoric species began to fly. An insight that is highlighted by a find from Germany. Several years ago, researchers unearthed the remains of a baby dinosaur from a chalk pit in Bavaria. This specimen is in excellent condition. An examination using ultraviolet light has unlocked its secrets. Its species, Sciuramimus, was an original saurian. Yet their bodies were densely covered with feathers. But these were more the downy, insulating type, rather than flight feathers. It's a sensational find, slightly more than 150 million years old. A discovery of far-reaching consequences.
Until the discovery of Sciuramimus, basically all the feathered dinosaurs that we had were close relatives of birds. So I mean, to have feathered dinosaurs was already quite a sensation, but all of these animals were quite close relatives of birds. Scuromymus is a much more basal predatory dinosaur and shows us that like feathers or feather-like structures were present in dinosaurs long before the origin of birds. And based on our present knowledge, we have to assume that basically all dinosaurs had feathers.
This doesn't mean that the mighty T-Rex and his kin were tramping around all clad in feathers. The larger the gap between the lineage of dinosaurs and that of birds, the more their plumage resembled hairs or a warming coat of down. Or possibly some decorative plumage, which might have graced the tail or the head. But how, then, did the early birds actually develop their ability to fly? The answer continues to be a matter of contention among researchers. One school of thought is betting on the Microraptor. It would sit high in a tree and then glide downwards, relying on the feathers of its forelimbs and those on its hind legs and tail. The first flights might have looked as elegant as that. Evolution applied a veritable test range to try out a variety of models and approaches. In the primeval forests of the Jurassic era, the feathered species of saurians were competing for the resources of their habitat, and some, to improve their chances, developed a means to fly. But some researchers reject the glider theory. They believe that the first flyers took off from the ground. You start by running, and sooner or later, you're airborne. A similar technique was used by the first motorized flyers some 100 million years later. They too went through a process of trial and error, of learning and of optimizing. Man determinedly advanced technical development. In contrast to nature, he left nothing to chance. That's why it took a mere several decades until aircraft became reasonably safe contraptions to carry us from A to B. But there still is nothing that glides through the air with the silence and seeming weightlessness of birds. And so today, they populate our planet with their dazzling diversity of color and shapes. No one knows how many species there are on Earth, let alone how many existed in previous ages. It is assumed that throughout the course of evolution, 90% of them became extinct. Take Dimetrodon, although its prospects looked bright. About 300 million years ago, long before the age of dinosaurs, it lived on a clod of earth where today grow the forests of Thuringia. Dimetrodon and its kin were members of a group of reptiles which are presumed to have been the precursors of mammals. Even back then, the world was divided between passive vegetarians and fierce carnivores. Dimetrodon was one of the top predators of its time. Its prey are blissfully unaware of imminent danger. Its flamboyant dorsal was probably meant to impress, like the antlers of a deer or the plumage of a peacock. Dimetrodon owed its success to its speed and to some decisive innovations. Its contemporaries still had to gorge their food, while Dimetrodon was able to bite off single chunks due to a set of unequally shaped teeth, a common feature of all later mammals and of enormous advantage. Another significant detail to put Dimetrodon in a line with mammals, be they hedgehog, horse, ape, or man, is an aperture in the skull, the so-called temporal fenestra or window. It was probably the ultimate prerequisite to allow the mammal's brain to grow and to develop. However, Dimetrodon's time was up. 250 million years ago, disaster struck. When it was over, there was almost no species left alive on the planet. To date, the cause of this mass extinction has not been ascertained. Volcanism, on a gigantic scale, may very likely have played an important role. Especially since it wasn't a single volcano that erupted. The world over, Earth spewed forth seemingly endless streams of lava. This spectacle lasted for more than 1 million years, until the deposits measured 3 kilometers in height and covered an area equal to that of today's USA. More than 90% of all species in the oceans, and almost as much upon land, had become extinct. Among those vanished forever are Dimetrodon and his relatives. Almost all corals, the trilobites, as well as innumerable species of insects. Yet the extinction of species set in at least 10 million years before the volcanoes first erupted. Was Earth hit by an asteroid? Convincing evidence has not been found. According to most recent research, the disastrous chain of events began in today's Siberia. Deep inside the Earth, immense forces were churning the rocks of the Earth mantle like a giant mixer. The hot rock pushed upwards, exiting at hot spots. Volcanic gases spewed forth even faster. In contact with water, they changed into sodium chloride and sulfuric acid and almost snuffed out every living organism on the planet. Over time, the gases altered the atmosphere. It had become a lethal cocktail of poisonous gases, sudden temperature changes, and dangerous ultraviolet radiation. Methane and greenhouse gases heated up the planet and destroyed the ozone layer worldwide. That is why most species of animals and plants died out before the giant streams of lava poured over their habitats and killed off most survivors. Consequences were global. Earth had become barren and empty. Almost. Some species had survived. Otherwise, there'd be no mankind today. Lystrosaurus was a so-called disaster species. They roamed an otherwise empty landscape in great herds. Their humble way of life enabled them to benefit from the new conditions. They were excellent diggers and would temporarily seek shelter underground. The primeval bunkers offered protection against dust and scorching heat on the surface. And so, with neither predators nor competitors, they proliferated across wide expanses of the planet. Their migrations prove that, back then, the continents of Africa, India, and Antarctica were still unified, or at least closely connected. For several million years, Lystrosaurus was the undisputed ruler of its global domain. But again, evolution began to gather pace. Conditions for life began to change, much to the disadvantage of Lystrosaurus. Its reign drew to an end. Yet we reserve a place of honor for the little vegetarian, if only in museums. Why does one species become extinct while another survives? What determines the winner and the loser? Paleontologists at the University of Bonn wish to discover what changes occurred in the world's oceans after the disaster had run its course. The Sierra Nevada is providing them with ample clues, and if you know how, you can easily determine whether it's a fossil or just a piece of rock.
Most bones readily absorb saliva. If I lick it, and it happens to be bone, it will stick to my tongue. And what's also helpful, it stinks. Knocking on it will set gas free, since crude oil within the bone has preserved the organic material. Hence the stink.
Every single bone that has been collected here is a leftover from some aquatic animal. Where today the desert is spreading ever further, 250 million years ago, you would have looked over a shallow, marginal sea. After most of life on dry land had been wiped out, this sea was devoid of life except for a few mussels and some primitive squid, and it would remain so for several million years. Fossilized bones prove that there was new life after this long hiatus, and they belong to a kind of species that did not exist in prior stages of evolution. Ichthyosaurus, the fish saurian. Its story began long before the saurians we normally think of.
I came up along here and noticed some small vertebrae. When I went on, I found remnants of some larger ones. When we had assembled them, we could see that it was a small spine inside the rib cage of a larger animal. I knew at once that this was the fetus of a fish saurian inside his mother. We then took the whole set of bones to Los Angeles for preservation.
Martin Sander named the mother Martina. Evidently, she gave birth to living offspring, which is most unusual among reptiles. Paleontologists have one explanation. Reptiles had begun to move back into the sea, a first in the history of Earth. They were amazingly similar to our dolphins as they adapted to life underwater, which illustrates that similar challenges bring about similar solutions. The babies developed inside their mother's body. There's no way to determine the gestation period, but one thing is evident. Since reptile eggs die off underwater, fish saurians gave birth to living young. Just like our present-day dolphins many million years later. The devastation of most of the planet had made way for new forms of life. Evolution gradually filled up the gaps. Fossils tell of eras long past. Each discovery expands our knowledge. The rocks of Nevada held another sensation for the researchers. These bones once belonged to a mighty predator, a fish saurian like Martina.
It's called Thalato-archon, meaning ruler of the sea. It was up to 12 meters long, a subsurface Tyrannosaurus, a top predator who would devour anything that came its way.
Thalato-archon isn't merely of interest because of its sheer size. It is proof that only 8 million years after the Great Disaster, life had made a complete recovery. Even the place of top dog in the food chain had been reoccupied. For Martina and her young, its presence would have made life more difficult. The giant fish saurian's favorite prey were other fish saurians. It was the first really huge predator to prowl the oceans. Sharks and orcas would appear only very much later.
Not too much farther.
The giant skeleton is carefully dug out of the rock. It takes a helicopter to carry it away. At the university lab, its bones will reveal many insights about Earth after the Great Disaster and the dynamics of its ecosystem back then. Finally, it was the dawn of the dinosaurs. For more than 150 million years, they were the superior species on the planet. In time, they occupied all ecological niches. Again, species came and went, until another disaster threatened to eliminate life on Earth. 65 million years ago, Earth was hit by a devastating mass from outer space. For the dinosaurs too, the end had come. Life on Earth would never be the same again.
It would be a mistake to suggest that mass extinctions are themselves selective events. I mean, they're catastrophes which wipe out major groups of animals and plants, and that clears the decks for a whole new flowering of evolution.
Some innovations of evolution have withstood all disasters. The egg, for instance. As different as these animals may be, they all lay eggs. Fish, frogs, as well as insects. And since these eggs are soft and slimy, they must be kept in a fluid environment to be able to develop and hatch. Eggs with hard shells were only brought forth by reptiles, which then became independent from the need for water. Most reptile species leave breeding to the warmth of the sun. But that doesn't mean that their offspring are left to themselves. After 3 months in its egg, an Argentinian caiman hatches and is soon followed by its siblings. Instinctively, they set off for the next body of water, calling out for someone as they go. And there she is. The mother clearly recognizes her own offspring and will help with the arduous journey. Having safely delivered the first, the mother returns to the nest at once, as some of the little ones are having a hard time breaking free from the shells. Their mother helps them, using her sharp teeth as delicately as possible. Motherly care is another innovative feature in the evolution of reptiles. Even dinosaurs laid eggs, and although they didn't survive the upheavals of their era, the egg, as such, did. Argentinosaurus laid them in vast nesting fields. Yet wisely, the colossal parents avoided sitting on them. A freshly hatched Argentinosaurus weighed around 5 kilograms. That's nothing compared to its adult size. 30 meters long and weighing up to 70 tons, they were the giants of their time. For reproduction, Argentinosaurus relied on mass. In the nesting fields, more than 10,000 hatchlings emerged at the same time. An opulent banquet for predators. Most of the little Argentinosauruses would end up in their stomachs. But having reached maturity, nothing could pose a threat to them, except, alas, a meteorite. The egg made reptiles and birds independent from water. For most species, this was a giant leap forward. For some, however, it just meant strenuous exertion. Each year, emperor penguins will travel up to 200 kilometers across Antarctica to reach their breeding sites, where the eternal ice never melts. Each female lays a single egg. Sitting on it is daddy's job. The time in between is crucial. Should the egg be exposed to the snow for too long, the embryo freezes to death. Made it. It's cozy and warm under the belly flap, Outside, temperatures can drop to minus 20 degrees Celsius even in summer. 9 weeks on, the offspring hatch, almost simultaneously throughout the colony. This is definitively a cold start. It would seem much more convenient if the embryos could gestate in their mother's body. But inventive as evolution has been in other cases, no species of bird has evolved beyond this step. They all lay eggs. The success of mammals is based on live birth. Although they account for only 1% of all species, mammals during the past 200 million years have spread across the entire planet, both underwater as on dry land. In the beginning, individual specimens were rather small. There are several features that distinguish mammals: a coat, breast milk, but before all else, it's the fact that the offspring gestate within their mother's womb. But here too, it all begins with a fertilized egg cell. This moves through the oviduct and settles into the uterine wall. There, it merges with the mother's tissue, and a new organ, the placenta, develops. The placenta conveys nutrients to the embryo as it grows, well protected in the amniotic sac, a tiny reservoir of ocean all its own. And when danger lurks, it's simply carried along. The first steps. Having given birth, mothers do what gives mammals their name. Mother's milk provides the infant with everything it needs. This is one of the truly decisive innovations of evolution. It's also the origin for the long and intense relationship between mother and child. Human infants, however, lack almost everything it takes to survive. Left to themselves, they're utterly helpless, quite unlike those of our nearest relatives. A baby orangutan, for instance, is much less dependent on parental care. But why has evolution arranged things this way? Scientists long assumed that walking upright narrowed the pelvis until the birth canal became impassable for the head. But apparently, this is not the decisive cause. It's the hunger of the fetus that, after 9 months in the womb, provokes birth. Its demand of calories increases week by week. At first, the mother can meet the demand, but only to a certain level. When it can no longer be increased, birth will begin. As different as the individual development may be, there is one thing common to almost all living beings. More than 99% of all species do it. Sex is one of the most successful inventions of evolution, yet a most enigmatic one. Why must we undergo such elaborate exertion to reproduce? Because sex is much more than mere coupling. First, one must find a suitable mate, then court and perhaps even conquer her. The male will always convey the same message: I'm the strongest and the healthiest contender, your best choice to sire offspring. It's a ritual repeated since times immemorial. No matter how big you are, or how small, it's a fight for exclusive access, so it's well worth the maximum effort. This is evolution's way of ensuring that the genes of the worthiest are passed along. The winner may approach the object of his desire, while others are merely glad to escape with their life.
You might think that the most efficient way for a female animal, say, to pass on her genes is simply to clone herself, rather than throw away half her genes in each offspring and mate them with those of a male.
The theory of evolution cannot explain everything. Why we engage in such elaborate efforts to find a mate remains an open question. Perhaps it's all about mixing the proper genes to enhance our adaptability. But how can we know that it's Mr. or Mrs. Right? Our genes themselves will take care of that. Outward features of attraction aside, we are controlled by a very less conscious element of mating. We smell one another. Smell is a decisive factor in any mating process. Evolutionary biologist Manfred Milinski's experiments with sticklebacks provide ample proof for this observation. And he's convinced mankind too is guided by the nose.
Anything else that rushes through our mind is irrelevant. Other considerations may come later. If, on the first encounter, a guy smells bad, even if he looks like Humphrey Bogart, he doesn't stand a chance.
Milinski has set up a test. He asks several men to sleep in a colourless cotton t-shirt. The following morning, when they hand it back, the cotton fabric will retain the body's scent for some time. In preparation for the actual test, Milinski had blood samples taken from everyone involved and analysed their immunogenic status. Now it's her turn. Which t-shirt smells best? This one was worn by a man whose immune system strongly resembles her own. Unattractive. So are the next samples. As it turns out, she is unconsciously selecting the one candidate whose smell promises the most protection for her offspring. She opts for number 5. She wouldn't mind a date. So, what has he that the others lack? He simply has the right tools. There are fragments of disease-bearing pathogens encapsulated in our body cells, which are caught and fought by the tools of our immune system. Every human being has a specific set of them. Some pathogens will be defeated, others will survive. So when choosing a mate, we're merely trying to complement our set of tools. The wider the range of tools we provide for our children, the better equipped they will be to fend off likely pathogens.
This mechanism motivates us to search for suitable mates to ensure that our children will be as immune to disease as possible.
Each one of us is equipped with our own set of immunogens, which give us our individual body odor. So, smell selectivity is the key. In this lab, they are creating perfumes made to measure. But can we actually recognize what works for us best? A synthesized perfume especially for her. B, a different feminine fragrance. She senses instantly which scent will complement her own. A wrong choice might have undesirable consequences. It doesn't really matter when it's only a flirt, but sooner or later, it will be critical for the health of our children. And that's where, hopefully, our sense of smell will guide us. That's why evolution invented sex, to avoid diseases. At Boston's Harvard University, scientists are also pursuing this goal. But they have chosen a different approach entirely. George M. Church is a pioneer research geneticist, and a very transparent one. His DNA code is on the net, along with his height, his weight, and even his illnesses. His so-called personal genome project aims at 100,000 volunteers to follow his example. However, the transparent human is a concept still viewed with considerable concern by many.
Sometimes we're concerned about the wrong things. If everybody hoards their personal information, then each of us loses. We all lose. But if we pool them together, and there are various strategies, I mean, ours is just one of the more radical ways of doing it, to make a point. If you can share it, then you can start seeing cause and effect in ways and cures.
Professor Church is experimenting with the cells of pigs with the aim of modifying their organs to suit the human body for transplantation. To achieve this, the pig's genome must be modified until they are no longer identifiable as alien invaders by the human immune system. And it's possible, due to a breakthrough in genetic engineering. The geneticist's magic wand is called CRISPR, the acronym for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. It's a tool to excise predefined sequences of the DNA chain and to implant a new, different sequence. This procedure can be applied to numerous sections of the genome. To manipulate mosquitoes to stop them from transmitting malaria, or to turn pigs into organ donors. Theoretically, it's even possible to interfere with the human genome, to eradicate diseases, but also to create the perfect baby. Yet, is this the future we want?
Biologists can certainly see and should see multiple futures, should see all the different futures that could happen, the futures that happen if you do nothing, the futures that could happen if you go back and say, oh, we're not going to use any of the technology, we're going to go back to the caves, or the futures that could happen if we do various kinds of radical change, eliminating diseases, taking us to foreign environments where we're not well evolutionary adapted, like Mars.
Life has always been under pressure to adapt to new conditions. And lest they should turn particularly unpleasant, you move on. A caravan in search of water, driven by drought and the need to find food. On the African continent, long-distance marches like this are a regular event, year in and year out. During the dry season, the arid soil turns the steppe into a life-threatening environment. Each year, more than 100,000 wildebeest migrate across eastern Africa. But between them and the rainy regions in the north, there's a major obstacle, the Mara River. It's do or die, yet hunger urges them on. The elder wildebeest know exactly what awaits them. They have already faced this challenge in years gone by. Once the herd gets moving, there's no stopping. Hesitate and get run over. For the crocodiles, the annual migration provides ample food to guarantee their survival. 1 out of 4 wildebeest in the herd won't see the end of the long march. They fall prey to predators or simply die of hunger and exhaustion. But most of them will make it. So for their species, on balance, it's well worth the ordeal. The feast is over. Lean times loom ahead. It may be months before the next opportunity to feed presents itself. Finally, rain. Life returns. The savannah is green. Hard times are over. Be it the Serengeti or the Okavango Delta, the picture is the same all over. When there's water, there's even time for fun and games. There's food in abundance, at least for the time being. The factors which necessitate migration are mostly ecological, such as lack of adequate food. Birds migrate from Europe to Africa, from Australia to China. Whales will cover thousands of miles underwater. Fish, fruit bats and locusts crisscross the planet in swarms of immeasurable size. Yet we know surprisingly little about the routes they take. Many secrets of animal migration remain unsolved. Perhaps these winged informants may help. Soon, the adolescent storks will leave their nest in southern Germany, destination Africa. They'll be under surveillance all along their way. Thanks to miniaturization, high-tech transmitters are revolutionizing the tracking of migrating animals regardless of their species. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute of Ornithology in Radolfzell near Lake Constance have initiated Project Icarus, an international effort to probe animal migration. Martin Wikelski is at the helm of Icarus. He intends to collect as much detailed information as possible.
Well, what fascinates us is that all animals migrate during certain parts of their life or their entire life. And in most cases, we know very little about these migrations. Where do animals survive? What do they need to survive? How can we protect them? What's the ecosystem service they provide for people? All of those questions are wide open.
Up at the International Space Station, they're installing a special set of antennae able to collect data from tens of thousands of transmitters. The system won't merely track routes and register stopover sites, but also record the animal's heartbeat and body temperature. Yet even without the sophisticated hardware, researchers have observed that many species are returning ever earlier from their winter quarters. It's the tangible result of global warming. If temperatures continue to rise, bird migration might cease altogether. This is already evident with some species. Take the black-cap. Only a part of its population still flies south. The others just stay in the north, benefiting from shorter and milder winters. Some may not make it. The majority of birds, however, do find enough sustenance to survive the cold season. Furthermore, the long journey south is strenuous and fraught with danger. Some fall prey to airborne predators, while others become victims of hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. Some clever birds recently discovered yet another option. They head west and fly to England. The British easily hold the world record for dispensing birdseed. In due course, this could even morph into a new species. Those who still prefer Spain as their winter resort must cover 2,000 kilometers of arduous air travel. When they return in spring, they may find that the best places are occupied. Those who stayed behind are already busily breeding and will thus produce more offspring. It's simply a matter of cause and effect, proving that bird migration is quickly adapting itself to changing conditions. So far, so good. As long as there are enough habitats to ensure the reproduction of a species. And as for changes, that is what evolution is about.
I'm not really worried about the fact that migrations change, because they have always and they will always change. But I think it's more a question of densities or biomass of animals that is decreasing or disappearing. And that is related to the fact that many of those areas that animals need to shift to in these new migrations are disappearing or have not been protected. So the key, I think, is that we have to protect areas that allow animals to change their migrations, to install new migration routes and to have new stopover habitats.
As long ago as 150 million years, migration was a common occurrence. Camerosauruses regularly took to the track. Weighing in at around 50 tons, they were the heavyweights of their era. During summer, their lowland pastures dried out. So, driven by hunger and thirst, the saurians headed for the mountains where water and food were plentiful even throughout the hot season. Back then as now, the search for better life conditions was the prime cause of migration. After 5 months in the highlands, and when the normal rainfall had resumed, the saurians would return to their summer habitats. It was a march of more than 600 kilometers across what's now the American West. Yet even 150 million years ago, dinosaurs were not the first to migrate. Doubtless, the earliest migration occurred in the oceans. It still does. When the sun goes down, billions of tiny organisms rise from the ocean depth to feed. Miniature crabs, larvae of mussels, and all sorts of other tiny marine life, in a word, plankton. It constitutes the lowest stratum of a gigantic food chain which keeps life on our planet going by migrating to the surface, each night anew. The blank pages in the history book of evolution are filling up. We have made great advances in reconstructing the past, but which course will evolution take? We're at a loss to look ahead a mere 50 years. Yet whatever the future may hold, mankind will have a decisive influence on things to come. From a bird's eye view, it's plain to see. Mankind is shaping the planet to an unparalleled extent. Scientists have even coined a term for it, the Anthropocene, the era of man. Our demand for natural resources makes us move mountains. Almost 75% of the surface of the Earth is somehow or other affected by man. Some distant day, the traces we leave may enable archaeologists of an alien species to reconstruct our life on Earth. It all began several millennia ago, but with the onset of industrialization, the process has accelerated. Take plastic bags. Year in, year out, 6 million tons of plastic waste finds its way into the world's oceans. They sink to the bottom and decay. Plankton and fish feed on them. In some regions, 40% of the ocean floor is already a layer of plastic waste. Soon, there'll be 10 billion of us to feed. The zones of arable land are being continuously expanded, and what once were tropical rainforests have been turned into pastures for millions of cattle. The diversity of species is declining on land and in the oceans. This too will someday be rated as a distinctive feature of the era of man. But how menacing is all this on the scale of evolution? Species have become extinct before. So far, there were 5 great waves of mass extinction in the history of life. Are we in for number 6? The list of endangered species grows ever longer. The polar bear, the tiger, and the orangutan still have a chance. If we act to preserve their natural habitats, their species may survive. Once a species has vanished entirely, it'll be too late. In his Boston lab, George M. Church is determined to achieve nothing less than a reversal of evolution. In other words, to create a veritable Jurassic Park. The extinct mammoth is high up on his list. By applying genetic technology, Church aims to mutate elephants into mammoths. During the last glacial period, the woolly giants spread across large parts of the Earth. The last specimens vanished only around 4,000 years ago.
We humans greatly contributed to the extinction of the woolly mammoth, which is very closely related to the Asian elephant, which is now endangered. If we could bring back some of that ancient knowledge, that DNA, which we can now read into the computer, we could potentially help the existing Asian elephant, and in return, it could help us to maintain very important ecosystems like the tundra in Siberia, Canada, and Alaska.
Due to climate change, the permafrost soil in northern latitudes has begun to thaw. Professor Church hopes that his recreations of mammoths will turn the inhospitable tundra back into fertile pasture. The giant grazers had been an important factor in the ecological framework. They helped to spread seeds and nutrients across their vast habitat. Today, the melting tundra releases more and more carcasses of its former inhabitants. Perfect material for the researcher.
It's like fresh meat. The DNA has been broken by thousands of years of cosmic radiation. So they're tiny, tiny pieces, millions of them. The remedy is you paste them together in the computer using software, and then you use the computer to print them again in a fresh copy.
Professor Church intends to gradually insert mammoth genes into the genome of elephants. They would grow a woolly coat, their ears would diminish in size, while the tusks would lengthen, and they would develop a thick layer of fat under their hide. As a result, you'd get a mammoth-like elephant which thrives in cold climates.
So if people get excited about it, the way they got excited about bisons, we could have, tens of thousands of cold-adapted elephants in a decade.
Whether man should interfere with evolution on such a scale is a question of ethics. Most geneticists oppose the reanimation of an extinct species. Even if it were possible, there would be no adequate habitat for such a creature from the past. Thus, we may not be presented with new mammoths, but there definitely will be new species to come and new great moments in evolution.